Here you are, friend. Lay your eyes on this. It's a masterwork if I do say so myself. The merchant set the sword on the counter just in front of where Steve had his palm pressed to the counter. It looked like a work of art as much as a sword. The pommel and hilt were interwoven spirals of silver and colored glass, and much of the blade was engraved. It does have a high price, but I assure you that if you pick it up, you'll see it's worth every drop. This time, as Steve watched the merchant's face, his smile grew, and then kept growing, the corners of his smile extending well up and around his face and disappearing somewhere behind his ears, and his eyes seemed to dilate to be nothing more than white and pitch-black pupils. "Your face is showing," Steve said, and the merchant's smile shrank for a moment before Steve grabbed the front of the creature's clothes with one hand and used the other to jam his knife up into the creature's throat, under the chin, and up into the brain. A gush of black blood rushed out around Steve's hand. Then he jumped over the counter, dropping the creature to the ground as he repeatedly stabbed it up through the throat into the skull until it stopped gurgling and twitching beneath him. When he was done, he was panting for breath, and Fenrina peered over the counter at him on the floor. "What the shit is that?" she asked. "Language, young lady!" Sherry gasped out. "Ooh, I'm tired of it. Astrid told me it's not magic words. You guys swear all the time. When those crap people beat us, Steve screamed fuck like 20 times. Why can't I?" Fenrina whined and stomped. "You know what? Fuck it. This is probably going to get weird. Swear all you want," Steve said, and could already feel the burn of Sherry's glare in the back of his head. "Oh, Now I don't know what words to use," Fenrina stammered. "It's not a limited offer, Fenrina, you just cuss when you're ready," Steve said, and then nodded at the body he was kneeling over. "This is a denizen of the dark, or darkizen. It doesn't really have a proper name. It didn't grow and evolve in an ecosystem or anything. It's from a different dimension, a shitty evil one." "Well, at least we got a cool sword," Fenrina said, and started to reach for the sword on the counter, but Steve held up a hand. "Don't! It's cursed! Wasn't that obvious?" He waited for Fenrina to pull her hand back and then looked down at the corpse he was sitting on. "The issue is that if the only store in town has been corrupted and there aren't any cats, well, we need to be careful. But hold on." He moved his knife up and quickly used the tip of the blade to cut the eyes of the creature out of the head. He had no issues handling the squishy orbs in his hands as he cut the optic nerves free. Then he looked over to the set of golden cat eyes still watching him from the dark. He tossed the eyes to the edge of the dark and then bowed before a black cat with a face crisscrossed in scars, stepped out of the shadows, picked up the eyes from the optic nerves, and pulled back into the shadows, disappearing into the dark. Was that an evil cat? Aren't black cats bad luck?" Fenrina asked as Steve got up. "No, people got it wrong. A black cat is a good thing. It's got a black coat so it can hunt things in the dark. What's often a bad sign is a white cat, because a white cat has a coat to help it hunt prey in the light. Besides, that was not a regular cat. We need to see if the rest of the town is infected with darkizens," Steve said, as he took a moment to rub his hands off with a quick cantrip to clean off the black sludge like blood of the slain creature. "Should we grab any supplies?" Sherry asked as she looked around the store. "No telling what's cursed. We need to warn Larry." Steve headed back to the entrance of the store, but then quickly slipped himself against the wall when he glanced through the window. "They're all over. This place is infested. Get ready, you two, we need to rush for the boat. Fenrina, these things look strange, but they can die like anything normal. So once we head out there, just stay focused and head for the boat. Got it?" he asked, and looked back at her. "I'm ready for anything," she insisted with a nod and stepped up to the wood door of the store. "Shall I?" She looked at Steve, who had switched out his knife for a sword. When he nodded to give her permission, she kicked the wooden door hard enough to smash it off its hinges and directly into a darkizen standing before the store, knocking the body off the wooden walkway connecting the villages and into the swampy water below. He wasn't alone, however, and all over the walkway and even crawling along the sides of other buildings were more of them. They were all shadowy dark figures that looked mostly human, but their mouths extended up and around the sides of their heads, their eyes dark points devoid of color, and their forms seemed to be growing more shadowy and ethereal by the second. Many of them didn't walk upright, but with their arms and legs distorted and disjointed as they moved around on all fours, legs and arms bent in impossible angles. When they saw what Fenrina had done, many of them turned to look at her, heads spinning all the way around their bodies. Then they pointed at her, their massive maws opening up to reveal jagged, sharp teeth before a pitch-black void. And the sound that came out of those mouths wasn't so much a scream as a high-pitched series of scratching and popping noises. "Okay, I was not ready for this," Fenrina said, as she stood still in shock. "Larry, Darkazins!" Steve yelled out as two of them were just about to leap down onto the boat from the raised walkway above. But Larry was already up and ready with hammer in hand. As one of the twisted creatures jumped down at him, he swung his hammer up into its face. There was a crack and snap as its head lolled off to the side, and it plummeted into the dark water rather than into the boat. When the second prepared to jump, Larry held up his hammer and spoke a holy verse to his god, but as a bolt of golden light struck the creature, nothing happened. "I swear, that never happens to Larry Love," the dwarf said as he looked up at the twisted husk with too much smile as it prepared to jump on him. "Holy magic doesn't work! Just smash him in the face!" Steve yelled out and was busy driving his sword into the face of a creature that had crawled out from the underside of the walkway to try and grab his legs. Fire magic! Fire magic everywhere!" "On it!" Sherry called out, her whip bursting into flames as she lashed out, wrapping it around the throat of one of the twisted shadow creatures, and in a flash actually burned its head right off. "I got this!" Fenrina shouted after kicking a Darkazin in the face as it tried to crawl out from under the walkway, much like the one Steve stabbed. She tapped lightly on her necklace then, and focused for a moment. "Fire spirits!" In a bright flash, a blue fire spirit showed up on her left shoulder and a red one over her right. "Fire?" they asked together. "Burn this bitch down!" she shouted, and the spirits jumped free of her shoulders, running at incredible speeds along the wooden walkway connecting the village and hopping onto many of the structures themselves. "Wasn't that cool? Swearing is awesome!" She beamed happily even as Steve drove his sword into the chest of a Darkizin before using his stone slap to smash it off the walkway. "Fenrina, we're standing on the wood too!" he shouted back, and the werehusky blinked with realization then. "Oh, oh!" She turned towards the boat, then bringing up her shield as she rushed the path, knocking Darkazins off the sides or driving them back to clear a path for Sherry and Steve to follow, which they did quickly as the entire village around them quickly burst into flames. Steve jumped into the boat first while Larry was using his hammer to smash the creatures in the face as they tried to rise up out of the water and get into the boat. Steve hurriedly set up the rudder while Sherry and Fenrina stood on the dock to protect the boat. Between Sherry's flaming whip and Fenrina's sword and shield, they were keeping the shadow creatures back, even as the wood village was totally overtaken with fire. The snap and crackle of the fire just mixing with the hissing and popping screeches of the Darkazins. In the boat! Push us off!" Steve called out then, and Sherry jumped into the boat, picking up the pole to start pushing them back, while Fenrina cut the rope tying them to the dock and kicked the front end out and away. She was about to jump in when another Darkazin rushed at her. She brought her shield down hard, using the edge to slam down into its neck, and with a bone-crunching snap, actually popped its head off as black sludge began to flow out and around her feet. "Ew, ew, 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 gross!" she cried out, and danced around a moment before jumping into the boat. They didn't really have time to get settled in as Steve gripped the rudder and tried to get the magic going. "Just... fuck!" he hissed out as the gale winds kicked up, then sputtered for a moment as he was having trouble focusing. Larry just kept playing Whack-a-Monster as they tried to rise up out of the water until Steve finally focused and got the gem working. The others staggered and had to clutch onto their seats as the wind picked up and began to send the boat hurtling across the tops of the dark waters, the fireflies and burning village casting everything in a dark red glow as he maneuvered around the burning buildings and deeper into the bayou. Once he was satisfied they were far enough away, he finally let go and let them drift to a stop. "Do you mind explaining to Larry just why holy magic doesn't work on those twisted abominations?" Larry asked, once the wind had died down enough for them to talk. It's complicated. Basically, they're creator type. They made a deal with the gods long ago. They serve a different power. So holy magic doesn't work because it's connected to the wrong set of realms. Steve tried to explain as he scratched the back of his head. A different power? Fenrina asked. Look, Talaron is at the center of a very large tapestry. Yes, a very large, intricate tapestry that's woven together in various patterns and layers. Most people just think that there's the heavens and hells in Talaron, but it's more complicated than that. These guys come from a different layer than ours, one most people don't know about. See, demons will exchange power for bits of your soul, or various things, but these guys come from a place where it's just darkness. See, the hells are supposedly bad places for bad people, but they're fairly open. Fire, lava lakes, bright red colors, spikes all over the place. Their home, it's just dark. It's creepy as shit, Steve said, even as he looked around them in the bayou. So, they're here to do what? Fenrina asked. Kill living things? Drag them back into their void if they can? They want to devour your soul so you cease to exist. Like I said, creepy as shit. Steve mentioned and then nodded at Sherry. But if a whole village of them exists this close to the city, then that means the manor has to be close. He's either gotten careless or arrogant since I was last here. Think you can check for moonlight for me? He asked, and she nodded. Yeah, just get me a bit closer to that tree. She pointed to a nearby walking tree that, despite the name, did not actually walk, since it wasn't an ent. But with its open and arched root system, it did look a bit like it. Steve pushed them closer, and Sherry used her whip, which was no longer on fire, to lash out around a root and pull herself up before she began to jump and leap from branch to branch, spinning and twirling between them as she climbed the tree. Larry would like to point out he could do that if he so chose. Larry simply chooses not to. Steve rolled his eyes as the dwarf said that. So, who is it who's gotten careless? Why do I feel like you're not sharing everything? Fenrina asked, and peered at Steve, who sighed. His name is Luc LeBlanc, or that's the name I know him by. We both trained together under Magister Malin, the guy that Darkazin mentioned. The thing is, the legend about the manor doesn't mention anyone by name, and those who know the Magister don't speak about him to anyone who doesn't already know him. Malin used to own the manor, but Luc destroyed his physical form in this realm in a jealous fit of rage, since he was going to pass over Luc and designate me as his protege. I barely got out. See, there's more to the tapestry of realms than just the dark one, too. There's also one of light. All sorts of spirits live in them, and between them and pull power from one or more, it's really complicated. But not like normal spirits like your fire spirits. These are more like... He rubbed his chin as he thought of how to properly explain it. Unique? They're not just servants, even if they do serve something. They consider themselves judges or magistrates. They're typically called the Magi-Ju. Sometimes they're known as the holders of the invisible scales, but that's a bit too long and fancy, I think. That cat you saw? He's the watcher of the crossroads. He knows everyone there is to know. It's his call as to who gets to pass between realms and who gets to talk to who. By giving him that offering, I was asking him to keep Luc from seeing me. But that might not matter since that's hard to miss. He looked back at the burning village in the distance, the red glow it cast stretching far in the other wise dark bayou night. So, is this something you need to keep secret from the Archon? Fenrina asked. What? No. After escaping that summer and getting back to Orbitus, I told her everything I'd seen and learned. Steve snorted a bit at the idea of keeping it secret from the Archon. Oh, what did she say? Fenrina titled her head in curiosity as she asked. She called me an idiot for a few minutes, and then gave me the keys to the Forbidden Archives and told me that further research would be properly supervised, but that I was free to learn. Steve shrugged. She let you learn evil magic? Fenrina seemed surprised. It's not evil, Steve stressed. I say that all the time. Magic is just magic. The reason some styles are forbidden is because they so easily lend themselves to nefarious things. But LeBlanc, now he is evil. He's been selling his dark talents to the wealthy and powerful in exchange for favors, which is why we're here. We need to get into his manor and find out what he has on the king. Then, if all goes well, we kill him. Then you become the new Magi, Jew? Fenrina hesitantly pronounced. No, it doesn't work like that. Steve shook his head. Does the person who kills him become the next spirit thing then? Could I become one? She asked, and Steve waved his hands. No, there's no new Magiju. That's not how it works. We're just going to kill him because he's an evil dick doing evil dick stuff. Steve huffed. Will that bring your Malin friend back to life? She asked next, and Steve just let out an exasperated sigh. No, he's not dead. Well, he was never really alive. It's complicated, but no, he's either back in the world and just letting this happen for reasons I don't understand, or there's just a plan I don't know about. These entities are strange and mysterious. They don't explain much, so it's hard for me to explain what even I barely comprehend. But this isn't about revenge so much as it is about doing away with something evil. Steve tried to make her understand. Is that Crossroads guy evil since he let all those shadow people into this world? Didn't you say he lets the spirits move around the tapestry? She asked, and Steve shook his head. He's not evil. Again, it's super complicated, but basically he just oversees things. He can't always take direct action, and sometimes if certain ceremonies are performed, he has to let the Darkizens through because tradition demands it. While Fenrina thought that over, Steve was happy to see Sherry slide back down her whip into the boat and end the conversation. I think I saw a clearing where the manor should be. She pressed her hand to Steve's forehead, and he closed his eyes a moment. Got it. Everyone sit down and strap in, he said as they quickly took their seats. As he gripped the rudder, her quickly got them spun around and heading off in the right direction. They didn't have too far to go this time, and the burning village was now just a faint speck in the distance, providing little more light than the hundreds of fireflies buzzing around the bayou around them. When they reached the clearing, it was a low, flat island with a manor set in the middle. A crumbling and decrepit old wall surrounded the island, and the gates were rusted and broken, hanging off their hinges. However, the smell of mold and decay was ripe in the air, despite being out in the open where the air should be flowing better. There wasn't a dock, so Steve ran the boat up onto the ground before the gates. Fenrina and Larry got off first, holding it in place so Sherry and Steve could get off next. Then he had them pull the boat further up onto the island and turn it around so they could shove it into the water in a hurry if need be. Was it like this when you were here? Fenrina asked, as they walked through the rusted and broken gates. The estate had clearly seen better days. The fountains weren't running, but instead overgrown with weeds and vines. The gardens had all been left to rot and were filled with stumps, dead skeletons of bushes, and weeds overtaking the paths all around. The once grand mansion at the center was crumbling and decaying as well. Not a single window still had regular glass in it, just shards and broken panes. No, Malin might have liked his privacy and living deep in the bayou, but he kept this place clean and well-maintained. Luke never really understood the point of the bayou. He was always focused on decay, mold, things like that. But Malin liked the bayou because the mix of salt and fresh water is actually great for life. This whole bayou is just teeming with life if you know what you're looking at, from the fireflies and owls to the ghost gators and skull snakes, Steve mentioned. Ghost gators? Skull snakes? They're alive? Fenrina asked, sounding dubious about the claim. Ah, just names. Ghost gators have a pale white glow. They're not really ghosts. And the skull snakes just have a color pattern that makes their heads look like skulls. Oh, and by the way, if you look around and see a giant floating, ghostly-like dog skull that's got intricate carvings on it and crescent moons for eyes, don't mind it. It's totally normal, he advised casually. Normal? Fenrina asked, still dubious.